All right, we are all set.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to the City Planning Commission special meeting on the zoning alignment project here on July 18th. So welcome, commissioners. And with us tonight is Roseanne Khalil, Manager of Zoning, and Kate Powers with the Zoning Office as well. I'm Kevin Kelly, Manager of City Planning. And we want to talk to you a little bit more tonight about the sections of the code that have been recently released and have this dedicated meeting to meet with you all to get your feedback. So essentially what we'll do tonight is we have a presentation that we'll go through. I'll start us off and then I'll actually turn it over to the consultant team that we're working with from Camiros. And they will go a little bit more in depth into the sections. I am stepping in for some of this presentation for Roseanne tonight. If you haven't heard, she's with us, but is getting over a pretty serious bout with COVID, and we wish her the best in her full recovery. But in the interest of saving her voice and the cough that she's getting over, I'll be doing those some of those slides for her. But yeah, so that's our agenda for tonight. So let me go to the next slide. So as you'll recall, the first batch of the zoning code that we released was back at the end of January of this year. And the intention, the approach here is to release this code in multiple batches or sections, if you will, because the code and the map is so enormous. It's difficult to sort of digest it all at once. So we're doing it in what we call batches. So in that first batch, that included the zoning map and the use table that was associated with that map, some of the use standards associated with those uses, and then how we're defining each of those uses. And then we, of course, did a series of public meetings that were in person and virtual, had a really good turnout for a lot of those, and lots of feedback at the meetings and online through rochesterzap.com. We continue to encourage the community to visit that site and follow along with this project and submit feedback. All of the documents, sections, and the map that have been released are on that website for everyone to review. So that was the first batch back in January. And then the current release, the second batch happened back in June, and again was followed by a series of public meetings. These were just virtual this time, but still a pretty good turnout for those. Second batch includes district standards related to dimensional and design regulations, general development standards, accessory structure and use standards, and then how we define each of those, the terms that are used in those, and how we measure different dimensions. So that's just sort of a complementary section to better understand those. So that's kind of what we're focused on tonight. To hopefully everyone's had a chance to browse those or dig a little bit deeper into those. But if not, again, we're going to have our consultant go through each of those with you tonight to understand them a little bit better. And then once we get past that, the next batch is going to be released later in this fall. We'll include things like parking and signage, landscaping, nonconformities, some procedural sections, that sort of thing. It's possible we might break that into two batches. We'll kind of see what the timing of that's going to be and how we'll break that up. But just so you see there, the list of remaining sections that we are currently working on with our consultant. So we've got a couple slides here about the goals of the project. I'm not going to go through these in any kind of depth because we've already talked about this with this group multiple times, but for posterity's sake, since this is being recorded and members of the community are welcome to come back and watch this afterwards, this will give them a chance to read through the two slides here of the goals of the project. And if you want to hear me ramble on more about those, you could look at a previous video of the public meetings that we had for this, where I talked a little bit more in depth about each of those goals. But it's important to keep all of those things in mind as we make the variety of decisions that are necessary for developing the zoning code. So that's the background that has led us up to today. And with that, I will turn it over to the very capable hands of Arista Strungis and Chris Dunat from Camiros. They've been absolutely fantastic to work with as a consultant team since the beginning of this project, and they will tell you a little bit about Camiros and then walk you through the sections that are part of this second batch. And Arista, just feel free to tell me when to advance your slides, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. And we do want to return the compliment. Working with staff has been fantastic. We're really enjoying working on this project. But just to introduce ourselves a little bit, I am Arista Strungis. I'm a principal and partner at the firm Camiros. We're a planning and zoning firm located in Chicago. The firm's been around since 1976. I've been there since about 25 years now. We do both planning work and zoning. Chris and I are really the heads of the zoning department at the firm. And as you can see there, we've done a lot of national work: Charlotte, Baltimore, Providence, New Orleans, Knoxville, Tennessee. There's a whole bunch that we've worked in. Some of our recent work also includes some New York State zoning. In Buffalo, you may be familiar with the Green Code. We just recently had the Unified Development Ordinance in Saratoga Springs adopted, and we did work with Rome, New York as well. And Chris is here. Chris, I don't know if you just want to say hello.
Hello.
Okay, just so everybody can see which one you are and what you look like. So as you are aware, in looking at the plan, what we're looking at is the land uses established there. And you can see here that these are the land use categories within the Rochester plan. And what we've done is link the zoning districts to these categories. So you see here, first set residential, low density, medium density, high density, then your mixed use districts, everything from boutique to neighborhood to flexible mixed use, and then of course the downtown core of Rochester. Some of the other districts that are there, things like regional commercial, as well as industrial. You've got these existing village center districts and the planned development districts. And then finally, the overlays, the overlay commercial and the overlay vehicle, and the overlay vehicle's new. We'll talk about that in a second. Next slide. So there are some structural changes to the code. It's a new district structure that reflects what you've got in Rochester 2034, which is really, as we just saw on the previous slide, linking land use categories to your zoning district structure. With that, we've been able to be very purposeful in integrating design and form standards into these district regulations, including things like different dwelling types, such as single family, two family. So really kind of bringing up that quality within there. And so these become less prescriptive design standards. So rather than having citywide design standards or citywide design guidelines, as you see in that next bullet, what we've done is tailored them to each of the districts. And what you'll really see is there's a new format and organization going on, which has kind of been convenient for us to be able to issue these in batches, because you can see how each of these sections it's kind of self-contained to a certain degree. We call it compartmentalization, which is putting within each article of the code, like with like. So you would see things like parking all in one section, landscape all in one section, the residential districts all in one section. And we really believe this makes it a far more user-friendly code. In addition, we've been trying to integrate graphics wherever we could. You see these start to come out in these in the zoning districts that we've got, and within some of the accessory uses that we've brought out. So you really see that graphic orientation starting to take shape. So we'll just go quickly through each of these sections that were released that you've been able to review. So the first big batch is the residential districts. And so really what you're looking at here are those three levels: the low density, medium density, high density. And so you see the low density is really for single family detached and attached, as well as townhouse. It's that lower height of 35 feet that speaks to the scale of those types of dwellings. And then you begin to move into medium density, where you see a bit broader range of what's permitted within there. So again, single family and then two family, the new categories of 3 family and 4 family, which used to be incorporated into multifamily, and then allowing for, in the MDR, the multifamily of more than 4 units by special permit. And again, looking at that height level of these neighborhoods at about 35 feet in height. Then finally, the HDR, the highest density residential. This allows for all the different dwelling types I've just mentioned, but then allows for slightly taller multifamily, actually bringing that up to about 65 feet in height. So you can see how these districts scale from low density to high density. A couple of the things you'll see in there, Lot size. We've eliminated minimum lot area, and now we're looking at instead a lot frontage requirement, which is done by averaging the block. And really what that does, it contributes to the rhythm of the residential blocks that you've got there. So it's really looking at how your blocks have been developed and continuing that pattern. Lot coverage has been added, which includes maximums for both building coverage, which would be any structure. So that would be your principal structure and any accessory structure, say a detached garage. But then to control things like environmental impacts that come from, say, stormwater, there's also a maximum impervious surface limitation, which is in that case covers everything that's there as well as any paving that would be on the lot. And then finally, modifications of setbacks. Again, really looking to bring up kind of what is the pattern in the neighborhoods now. So requiring front setback averaging. So it's really looking at what are the setbacks along the block. Let's make things line up. As well as addressing things like corner lots and even reverse corner lots, which I know is probably a little bit harder concept for everybody. Even we get confused. Chris and I get confused talking about it, but it's a condition that exists. And making sure that we're being very sensitive to how those corner lots and those new setbacks are treated. Next slide. And as you see, as we talked about a little bit on that intro slide, we're starting to bring in some design and some controls on building materials. Here is just an example of kind of a standard multifamily dwelling. We're not intending for you to try to read this. As you know, these are all within those documents that you can review. We're not trying to control the architecture. What we're really trying to do is the kind of the good bones of building design. And so you see this reflected here in a graphic from the ordinance on multifamily. Our next set of districts, as I mentioned, is the mixed use and commercial districts. And so again, you see this scale up in intensity, and it starts with the lowest, the boutique mixed use district. This is where you have buildings about 40 feet in height. Again, that mix of uses happening there, as the name of this indicates. The neighborhood mixed use is kind of that next level up, again, allowing for a whole mix of uses, including residential, bringing that up to say 55 feet in height. So really getting a more kind of more intense mixed use environment that you see then goes into the flexible FMU mixed use district, which is a 65-foot height, which is really intended for both creating new mixed use, but allowing for adaptive reuse to happen in those areas. So really taking advantage of structures that you've currently got in place that can be reused for something. And then finally, the regional commercial, the RC. This is really kind of those areas that are a bit more auto-oriented. There's an unlimited height that happens there because of, they could be a bunch of different things happening there. It really kind of acknowledges the reality that's in place in all cities. One thing I do want to be that you see here on the slide that we are trying to be sensitive to is that we know in cities like Rochester, where you've got residential right against commercial, we want to be sensitive to that. So as you see in those NMU, FMU, and RC districts, that portion of a building that's located within 30 feet of an LDR or MDR, again, low density, medium density, is limited to 40 feet. So it's really trying to create that relationship and transition so that those areas don't feel overwhelmed. A couple of new controls that we've put in place within these districts. It's the maximum building length along a street for a multifamily dwelling. A lot of words right there. But really what it's intended to be is not to create these kind of giant, massive block long buildings that start to disrupt kind of the natural character that's present in these mixed use areas. So you see it applies in the BMU at an 80-foot maximum length, in the NMU at 120 feet, and in the FMU only when it's across the street from a residential or BMU district. There is also, based upon what we looked at within Rochester 2034, some standards that are currently in place, a maximum square footage for non-residential uses. And you see that in the BMU and the NMU, which are kind of your lowest scale mixed use districts. 3,000 square foot limit for non-residential in BMU, and a 9,000 square foot for each non-residential in the NMU, the neighborhood mixed use. Next slide. What you'll also start to see here is some new controls that have been built in. When you look at the BMU, the NMU, and the FMU, you'll start to see build to zones, which really talk about how far the building has to come up to the street. So 0 to 10 feet, whatever that number may be, that's where the building needs to locate. working in conjunction with this, which is trying to create, really build up a street wall, something that is pedestrian friendly, that really does speak to that kind of mixed use environment. Two controls are in place with it: the build out percentage and the build to percentage. And so bear with me, once it clicks, it clicks. So the build out percentage is really related to saying, of my lot, if my lot is 100 feet wide, I'm just using random numbers, and my build out percentage is 80%. That means on that 100-foot wide lot, my building needs to be 80 feet. And really what it's trying to do is kind of create that street wall. So it's a requirement for how long the building needs to be along that lot width. Then the build to percentage provides a little bit of flexibility. So if I have that 80-foot building and I have, say, a 20% build to zone, that means 20 feet of that building, I hope that math is, no, 25% build to zone, let's go with that. That means 20% of 20 feet of that 80-foot building would need to be in that build to zone. So you get some flexibility, as you can see in that second diagram there, to kind of stagger how the building is meeting the lot. You've got some flexibility in there. So these are all kind of working together. Next slide. And also, as you saw before, and you'll see in more detail, these are where these design standards really kick in within the mixed use and commercial districts. And again, looking for those elements of good building design, but not necessarily working to strictly control the architecture. And again, an example graphic from the code. Next slide. One of the most intense districts is the downtown mixed use district, which is the case when you do have, it's your downtown area, it's your core. And what you see here is that it's a little bit different than the other districts. So you have your DMU, your downtown mixed use district, and you'll see your controls, things like those build to zones, those build out and build to percentages that we talked about. Those are controlled by location, because what we're really trying to do is create a consistency along the facades located in certain areas. So you see here the downtown activity street, the downtown link street, when you're adjacent to, when the facade's adjacent to a waterfront or park, or when you're along an alley or a private internal access drive. And really what these are doing is coordinating, and I believe the camp, it is the camp plan that does actually talk about what these streets are and where these streets are. And so using that direction of where these are, we're creating a consistency along these areas, kind of making it easier. If I'm located here, I know exactly what applies to me. We did look at, again, a maximum building length here, which would be 300 feet. But again, created some flexibility. You see here, it can be exceeded with a passage or recessed building design. And that's what those two diagrams there on the side are showing, a way to break up that facade if it does need to be longer than 300 feet. What are my options for actually achieving the longer building, but kind of keeping that rhythm that we're looking for throughout the downtown? Similar to the other districts, there is a sensitivity to the maximum height when it is adjacent to a less intense district. While there is no height limit on the downtown, there is some limitations in terms of how that height can be used when you're adjacent to an LDR and an MDR. And what we've said here is within the first 150 feet of an LDR or MDR district, you are limited to a 60-foot maximum height. And again, that's trying to keep sensitivities to transitions. Like the other districts, there are design standards and controls for the downtown mixed use district. And we have retained the Cascade Historic District standard of the primary building facades being brick and glass. So that was maintained from the current code. That was not changed. Next slide. There are the village center districts. As you are aware, there are 4 of them: Public Market, Harbor Town, College Town, and the Marina District. These have been reformatted to match the proposed code. Substantively, they are the same. There may have been some minor clarifications or corrections in there, but essentially we really didn't tinker with these. Even the graphics that are currently in the code were brought over into the drafts that you see today. The industrial district, again, this is one that's pretty flexible. There are no setbacks in the industrial district unless you're adjacent to a residential or a harbor town village district. And again, that's that sensitivity to lower intensity districts. There is no height limit, and there's only some very limited design standards that apply only when the facade is not on an industrial link or an industrial local street, again, coming from that camp plan that talks about different street types. Open space district has been maintained. There's really no substantive changes to this one as well. And then finally, of the districts, there are the 3 overlay districts. In terms of the commercial overlay or the OC overlay commercial district, this combined the current overlay office and overlay boutique into one district. It allows for more small scale commercial uses in the residential neighborhoods, and you see there's significant limitations. They're limited both in size to 1,200 gross square feet. They're limited to an occupancy of no more than 45 people. Hours of operation are limited from 6 to 11, loading and unloading limited from 8 to 6. So it's really intended to accommodate those small scale uses with some standards that make it clear how that's defined. We are still working with the county on the airport overlay district as this relates to public safety and FAA issues. So we're waiting to get a review and update of those standards by the county. And then finally, there's the OV, the overlay vehicle district. And this is a new district that we've proposed. It provides additional areas for vehicle related uses to locate where they historically have been successful, but not necessarily as part of the base district. So it's really intended for very limited application. This is where we allow for vehicle repair, vehicle bodywork, vehicle sales. There are some standards in place for fencing, what the setback should be, what screening is there. And then some exemptions based on how these uses operate from things like build to lines or build to zones, really to accommodate these uses specifically in areas where they actually have been doing well, but not necessarily changing the entirety of where they're located to a whole other district that brings in a variety of other uses. Next slide. So then the last 2 chapters, well, really 3, there's definitions, is the general development standards, as well as accessory uses and definitions. So the first one is general development. You see some kind of broad on-site development standards that apply kind of generally. These are things that may be familiar to you: designated buildings of historic value, residential dwellings with existing open porches. This is where you'll find those types of standards. Then we have refined the standards for residential conversions. And so these are the conversion of existing buildings to increase or decrease the dwellings within the LDR, MDR, and HDR. So the way that this section has been proposed and put forward, in the LDR, a residential conversion would require a use variance. And then if they don't meet the standards, which would still apply even with the use variance, then they would require an area variance as well. In the MDR and HDR, residential conversions of up to 4 units are allowed if they meet the standards of this section. If the conversion does not meet the standards, then both a use variance and an area variance would be required. So there's this level of review that comes from these variance, the variance applications. There's minimum unit sizes that are based on the number of bedrooms. That has not been changed. A minimum building size of 1,500 square feet. Again, that has not been changed. And then a minimum lot area. And this is where there has been a one tweak to this: 4,000 square feet for 2 units, 6,000 square feet for 3 or more units. Again, changed from 6,000 and 9,000 respectively. And then parking, that they will be required to comply with the parking requirements of the district. And we are still working on the parking section, but we know that they will be required to provide additional parking. Other standards within the general development include some basic exterior lighting standards. These are meant to protect against glare and trespass. Next slide. We have put in standards for fences and walls. There are certain standards for the residential and village center districts. In the non-residential districts, we've created some allowances for a 6-foot fence along a street when that fence is 80% open, or you could do a 3-foot solid wall, kind of understanding that sometimes fences are part of the design of the site and the lot. And 8 feet when it's not along a street. We do want to point out our error. We did forget to say that it was 8 feet in height for fences in non-residential districts along other streets or along other yards when they're not against a street. That will be corrected in the subsequent draft. We've got some standards of screening for refuse and recycling containers, as well as mechanical equipment and above ground utility equipment. There are standards for permitted encroachments. An example of the table you see there is that's how we've been organizing this. And within this table, you see things like how much can something encroach into a required setback? So things like eaves or balconies or a chimney or a bay window, allowing that flexibility for additional architectural features, really creating that interest in particular in residential dwellings, even non-residential. And then some basic performance standards for noise and odors. The second section that follows Gen Dev is, general development, is accessory structures. These are general regulations, the maximum height, the setback of these structures, the size, and then understanding that there's some sensitivities with certain types or some special conditions that need to be met. There are specific controls on those uses that you see there, everything from ham radio equipment to apiaries, chicken coops, detached garages, solar panels, wind turbines. You'll see some specific controls on those in order to allow them to happen in a way that's reasonable. Next slide. And then finally, definitions and measurement. We do want to clarify that the definitions released with this section are specifically related to the sections that we've released. So there's going to be more terms coming as those other sections, that second batch that Kevin mentioned is coming along. Then we'll be adding more terms to that. But for the sake of what we were talking about in terms of everything I've just gone through, those are the general terms that you see defined. We've also done a complete set of measurement methodologies, and this is really kind of a handy section within there that tells you how to measure lot frontage, how to measure building height, how to measure setbacks in various circumstances to make it very easy for everybody, whether it be code administrators or the public, to understand what we mean and to make sure that it's consistent and limited in interpretation. And as you'll see, as some of these things we've pulled, that section in particular does have a lot of illustrations in order to really help facilitate that understanding. And so with that, I think I turn it back to Kevin, but I think he's going to say the same thing I would say, which is I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arista, and to Chris as well for the work that you guys have done on this and working with our team weekly for months and months and months. We're meeting with these folks weekly. And as you can see here, based on what she's gone through, we are truly in the weeds of some really important parts of the zoning code. And we recognize that from the community's perspective, there's very, very strong interest in the map and the permitted uses and that sort of thing. And we continue those conversations with the community. But for both those that administer the code and anybody that coming to the permit counter with a proposal of some kind, application of some kind, those folks know very clearly the importance of these more weedy, more technical sections of the code. So we're really trying to do our due diligence and put our best foot forward to give these sections the attention that they need and be very careful and thoughtful about the dimensions that we choose, how we design the graphics, and just really think through the ripple effects of these sort of real world regulations. But ultimately what we've put together here is draft one. It's our proposal. And we welcome feedback from the community on that kind of stuff. And tonight is a chance for you all to weigh in on these things as well. With that, Chairman Watson, anyone else would like to ask questions or make comments on what we put forth here today?
Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you. I guess I'd start off with to be's or not to be's in the urban farm, et cetera, in two different places. Page 105 and page 121. I think one calls for no be's and the other one says yes be's. So I think, I'm not sure which it is being proposed. Maybe I'm misreading it, but it looked to me like it was saying one part is edited to say no bees allowed, and the other one is saying bees are allowed. And likewise, on page 97 and 117, on-site managers for hotels. One part says no on-site manager and the other one says on-site manager. And I mean, maybe I'm not reading it right, or maybe it's, you know, part of the whole process of the editing of this, but I guess I just picked up on it, 2 inconsistencies there.
Commissioner Mauser, I'm taking some notes so we can follow up. Can you give me those first 2 pages on the Bs again? I missed them.
Yeah, the B's page 105 and 121.
Okay.
And also with the urban garden thing, there's no bees allowed there, and that's, I think, page 107. And then they, I don't know, personally, I don't know if I should get into this, but like all pesticides are allowed. I can't remember what page that was on, but I'm thinking some of that stuff will kill you. I mean, you know, if, you know, there's some nasty pesticides out there that if they're allowed in the urban area, why not, you know, why not let lead paint? Why, you know, why be careful about lead paint? But I'm not an expert on pesticides. I just try to avoid them. Okay.
I can help with the bees. I can answer that if that's helpful.
Yeah.
So there's kind of there's 3 ways that bees are addressed, apiaries are addressed. The first is within the use of urban farm, which is kind of the larger scale farming operation, an urban farming operation that would happen, that apiaries are permitted as part of that use, so part of that principal use. In the community garden, which just by its name is kind of that smaller scale local thing, apiaries are not permitted within that because they're really not kind of monitored. It could be, the thinking is it could be a day, people can, we can change it, but it's kind of, it won't be monitored. People may not, you know, the bees would be left unattended. We want to be safe about that. Then there is the third aspect of it, which is in accessory structures where you have apiaries, and that would be just for a single use. If I am a residential dwelling and I want to keep bees in my yard, those are the standards for how I would keep those bees. So that addresses, those are the kind of 3 ways that the bees have been addressed.
So there's no inconsistency. I'm misreading it then, right?
No, it's not even a misread. It's just kind of understanding how the pieces
Okay.
fit together, the principal and the accessory.
Okay. Okay. And I'm assuming chain link fences are just not considered solid when they've got slats because it's a cheap way out of trying to get a better fence. Okay. Porches, the definitions and measurements part where you have the models. I was a little confused with the diagrams because I'm thinking the little bump outs on the model are supposed to be porches. And, you know, so they're kind of L-shaped little buildings. If the bump out that's shown on the front of them are porches, then in the code, there's a distinguishment between porches that are screened and porches that are open. In other words, porches that are open can stick out into the front yard. But if you enclose it by screening it in, you're now considered a part of the house and you can't be sticking out in the front yard. So if I'm reading that, if I'm reading the model diagrams correctly, that those little bump out, if they are porches, need to be modeled so that they show that there's columns there and they're open. So otherwise it's confusing as to me, I'm looking at it going, well, the front yard is yay deep on one side of the house and not so deep on the other side of the house, and it's all enclosed house. So I don't know whether I'm inferring correct things or not on that.
What page is that, Richard?
Call it page 162.
162, okay.
I mean, I think all the models are kind of like that. And I'm easily confused, so, you know.
That's okay. I'm going to let Arista address this again, but I think, and we can check them all, but the intention is that when it is showed as a solid, it is not a porch. It is an addition to the house. It is a appurtenance on the house. It's an alcove on the house, but it's part of the house.
Mhm.
When the diagrams show it with columns and openness, then it is a porch. And part of the reason for instance, in the front yard diagrams of showing these alcoves, these additions on the houses, is we often get houses with big bay windows or big appurtenances or pieces that stick out. And they want to count their front yard from the edge of that little tiny bay window to the front instead of the main part of the house to the front. And so we're trying to show that the front yard is really from the front of the main part of the house and follows that line to the street.
but
Otherwise,
I'm
we
not-
end up with these rectangles that are not front yard or side yard because the house is not a perfect rectangle.
Yeah, that doesn't help me with this at all. Because
Okay.
what you're saying, basically, I mean, to me, I look at it and going, well, on page 162 there, that if I'm looking at the front of the house on the left side, the front yard is maybe, let's say 50 feet deep, but on the right side of that house, it's only 40 feet deep. Are we representing here that area colored blue for the front yard? Is that supposed to be what the zoning says is the minimum front yard? Or is it just
So-
saying that we consider for talking purposes, this is the front yard?
So there's no minimum front yard. There is a minimum front yard setback. So we're
Yeah.
distinguishing between the setback, which is a dimensional distance,
Yeah.
and the front yard. The front yard is the space between the house and the front property line. And that
So
can be an
this-
irregular shaped space.
Okay, so that's what that's saying, is that we call
Yeah.
this the front yard, but we're not saying dimensionally we're representing something there. Okay,
Right. So when we say
Okay.
something can't be in the front yard, we want to be clear what we consider the front yard. And that depends on where your house is and the shape of your house, but it's between the part of your house that faces the front property line and the property line. When we're talking about a dimensional setback, that's a hard and fast line.
yeah, okay, well, and I was looking at this thinking, well, that doesn't look hard and fast to me.
Yeah.
So,
And part of the reason for the two diagrams is people very often get confused between setbacks and yards. And we're really trying to help them understand the difference. And Arista, I don't know if you want to add anything, but that's sort of my take on it. You're muted, Arista.
They're there for illustrative purpose, so they're not showing any required minimum dimensions, and it really is to show people what is a yard, what is a setback, just as you said. I don't know that I have anything to add.
well, I don't see it. I don't think it's saying there's a setback. I don't think they're identifying what the setback is.
So I can jump in here. Hi, everyone, this is Chris. Let me turn my video on. So if we're looking at page 162, Commissioner Mauser, you can see the yards are the top half of that page, right? So that's where Roseanne was talking about. Everything essentially between the front of that house and the front property line is considered to be the front yard. And that can be irregular, say, for instance, if you have an appurtenance on the front of your house. So that's what you're seeing
Okay.
there, right?
Okay, that's good, yeah.
And then the bottom half is the setback. So you can see the setback doesn't vary with the shape of the house. The setback
Right.
is a line directly across the front. So that is the hard and fast requirement. The
Okay,
setback is the must. It's your house must be behind the setback. And then
Okay.
the yard is basically everything up to the front of the house. So they kind of sit on top of each other, but they work in different ways.
you're right. Okay, that's clear. It's clear. It wasn't, okay, yeah, makes sense.
This is Steve Repholz. I just have I guess, a similar question, and it's more in comparison to how I guess I had understood corner lots, in different, cases in the past. We've looked at a corner lot as having multiple front yards, but it looks to me with this new code that that's better defined. And so it's clear which is a front yard and which is a corner side yard. Am I reading that correctly? That now a corner lot does not have two front yards unless it's a double frontage lot. But if it's if I look at, for example, on page 164, I guess that's the reverse corner, which is
Yeah,
a little
that's
bit different, but it has a front setback, and then it has a reverse corner side setback.
Yeah,
Or
so
reverse
before
corner
we
setback.
jump, so the one I think is, Kevin, I think before it is just this corner lot one. Am I wrong?
What page?
Is there just, go up one more?
Oh, one,
Go back down.
162, 162, I think.
So yeah, as you can see here, yeah, to your point, we have clarified now and made dimensions to make sure that everything's reasonable, that if you have an interior lot, you've got 2 interior side setbacks and a rear and a front. And as you see in this one, on a standard corner lot, you do have a corner side setback. So you're not dealing with 2 front yards anymore. In particular, as you're doing averaging, that can become difficult for people. So we've
Okay.
just created that, established that control.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I would also point out, we're sort of focused on residential here, but this also affects a lot of our, for instance, industrial sites. Industrial sites tend to be a full block or almost a full block, and they end up with 3 front yards. And they need some space to put, their cooling tanks and other things. And it ends up being very, very difficult because everything's a front yard. So now we're trying to allow for sort of primary front yards and the corner sides and other things to allow the full development of these sites without endless variances.
Is there anything in the code that indicates how the primary front yard, what is on a corner lot or one that occupies the whole end of a block, what side gets determined to be the front yard versus the side yard? Or is that just negotiated?
Those are all defined as part of the setbacks and yards provisions. Those are all in there.
Okay.
And I would say in general, it has to do with which is the shorter or the longer. And in some cases for the double frontage, it has to do sometimes with what type of street it is. Again, having that front yard be on the more primary street.
Okay. But that would have to do with the conversation with zoning and the building and the property owner.
Yes, but I would say this code now does provide guidance on that, what should be considered the front yard.
Okay.
And just to clarify too, when you're looking for that definition, it's actually related to the definition of lot line. So you'll see that the front lot line is defined as, in the case of a corner lot, the shorter street lot line is the front lot line. And then that relates to the definition of front yard and setback.
I have a question. It's more of a general question. Have this initiative been implemented into other cities with similar size and population? And have you any feedback of some of this? So for instance, I don't know if the third-party company have implemented some of these changes or initiative in zoning in other places, and do you have any data that we could potentially see what's going to happen as we continue throughout this process, not just with parking regulations, which I know is something that we as planning commissioning always have some issues, and same with rezoning and so on. Have you got any comments or feedback from other cities that you really have worked on?
Well, and Chris, jump in here too, if you'd like. I mean, we've been working with different cities, even cities in New York State, across the country for many, many years now. And so what we're doing in Rochester is unique to Rochester. So it's not like anything that we've proposed here. You know, while some tools we use throughout each city, and they're just kind of a standard set of controls and regulations that just work. Things like creating the average lot frontages, the sizes of things, the setbacks that we require, those are unique to what's going on in Rochester. So it's not like we've just got a set of standards that we gave you and you put it down and said, okay, this is it, let's go. We took much of our direction from Rochester 2034 and those that, and you know, all the staff that had worked on the 2034 plan that set policies in place. You know, the intent here is really not to create an environment where people can't develop. It's intended to make it easier to develop, to reduce the number of nonconformities that are in place. And to really kind of reflect the character of the city of Rochester. So, you know, we've done zoning ordinances elsewhere. We believe they've been successful. Zoning is something that takes a little bit more time to see kind of on the ground actions. just because it's a development and the market as that works. But, we do believe that kind of really tailoring to your established policies from your comprehensive plan, as well as looking at what is on the ground. What are the lot sizes on the ground, lot frontages on the ground? What are the setbacks? What are the heights? That we have something that can build a successful code for Rochester.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Arista, could you, sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Arista, could you add just a little bit, I think, to expand on Commissioner Picardo's question? The concepts that we have of what we're doing with corner lots and reverse corner lots and using lot frontage instead of lot size. Just maybe some reassurance that these are not novel concepts, that these are concepts that other people do use and have a fair amount of success, if you could.
Oh yes, these are common concepts. The idea of a front yard and in particular a corner yard, that is something that is used very broadly, in particular in residential districts. We see it all across the country. This is not a new concept, and it's really meant to kind of make sure that the lot stays buildable, and that you're being reasonable in terms of how much you can, how big these setbacks would be. Things like the lot frontage controls, that is something that's been picking up across the country as well, that people are looking at different ways to control kind of the size of lots, maybe not necessarily focusing on area, but looking at the width of the lot so you can kind of see what it's like along the street. And it's basically pulling, your ordinance has tools that have been used elsewhere. We're just pulling together the right ones for Rochester and then tailoring them to exactly what's needed in Rochester. So I don't know that anything in here is so completely out of the ordinary that we've never done it before, but every one of them has been fully tailored to what's going on in your city. But these are concepts that are working and that are used in codes very frequently.
I would add to that too. I'm just gonna jump in. It's always tempting because zoning and regulations are sort of about the minutia, right? So you want to look at sort of individual things and say, has this been tried before? I think most of the approaches that we're putting forth here, in fact, probably all of the approaches that we're putting forth aren't novel and have been used. As Arista mentioned, they are all tailored toward the specific conditions in Rochester. But the thing that I want to point out is that it's really important to kind of look at all of the proposed approaches in aggregate and what that benefits the city and how that benefits the city, right? And that's really through flexibility that we're adding. And the flexibility is something that you kind of can quantify in terms of looking at cities that have more flexible development regulations and the development that occurs in those cities, right? Because there is a coordinated relationship between clear regulations that are flexible and the type and quality of development that the city sees. So, we're doing a lot of specific things through the zoning ordinance, but they're really working together in aggregate to get the city a little bit more flexibility, which was a big part of the Rochester 2034 plan as well.
Can I just ask a general question then of the Planning Commission? Unless you have more specific things to ask about, like what's your general comfort level with this, what we call the second batch of code that we've released? Do you feel like you've had enough time to be with it and review it? Or do you feel like tonight's sort of overview that Arista gave is helpful for you to dig into it deeper some more after this? Just what's your general sense of how much more you want to sit with this?
I say the second for me, Kevin. It's good. It's a good overview to understand the framework of understanding. And now I can actually dive in more deeply, knowing where you were when you started.
Okay.
Agree. I agree with this statement.
Yep, so do I.
Okay.
Can you, oops, sorry, Kevin. The follow-up, of course, is do you have an idea of how much time you'd like to elapse between getting back together to make sure that you've had some time look at it, so we can sort of plan on the next meeting.
Oh, I think, go ahead, Brad.
Thanks, Dave. I like the frequency. I don't mean to keep pushing this whole thing back by just asking for more time on looking at these things, but it is essentially, it's important, and it's a second ask in addition to like regular CPC stuff, which is our monthly commitment. And so if we're doubling up on meetings and doing 2 meetings per month and asked to look at regular caseload in addition to looking at these comments, I think that that's fair. So like maybe the second week of August to come back with meaningful reviews. I don't know if that's too far. That just logically makes sense to me. And the request also seeing if Arista's presentation or deck can be forwarded around, if she's willing to share that, that would be awesome. Again, just to have for reference when we're looking through the actual draft code.
Yeah, and as far as that deck, it is up on the ZAP website under, there's the documents and presentations page. And you'll find this at the bottom under public input sessions, because you'll recall we did public meetings on more or less the same deck, and you'll find the link to the presentation.
Awesome.
Down there.
Sorry, as you were talking, Kevin, I was just thinking also, I don't know if it has to be, I don't know if everybody else on the board feels that it has to be another meeting, or if you can, I'm personally comfortable writing comments and sending them in. And that could kind of get around an additional meeting if we wanted to do that. And we can essentially kind of come to an agreement with everybody on a deadline by which comments can be submitted for you.
I think that could certainly work, and that could be wrapped up into a future meeting to also update you guys on the public comments in this section. So we could sort of do both in one, potentially.
Yeah, I think this is Dave Watson. I think to back up what Brad was saying, I think 2 weeks after our regularly scheduled meeting coming up at the end of the month gives us an appropriate amount of time to go through and follow up and dive a little bit deeper into what we've been shown, and to be able to provide comments, again, individually on our own or in a meeting if people feel that that's more appropriate.
Yeah, I agree. A week after our meeting, we have a meeting next week, a week or week and a half after, I'm okay with the meeting. I do like the meeting concept because it allows us to ask questions, and there's just a lot of ground that we could cover in one meeting, and it put less work on the staff on reading the comments, getting back to us and things like that. So I would say in addition to the comments, I would prefer to keep these meetings until we approve those.
Yeah, I too like the meetings because you get the explanation of what's happening and kind of cements your visual understanding of what you're reading. So either way will work for me, but the meetings are very good. I find them to be very good. I think this batch, the presentation is excellent.
Thanks, Eugenio.
Steve, Richard, what are your input?
No, I agree. There's a lot here. So having this overview and being able to dig in and then either provide written comments or, verbal comments at a meeting, it'd be good for me to jot them down as I'm going through it, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm comfortable with whatever time frame we come up with.
Yeah, I concur with Steve. I'm going through it in advance, putting it notes down, whether you send them in and don't attend the meeting because of conflict or whatever, or also just notes to prep your speaking at the meeting is good.
I'm sorry, Kim, I missed you.
No, that's okay. I'm having some connection issues today. So in all honesty, I missed your comments on this topic. So that's only fair that I get left out. in any event, I agree with Brad that I need another meeting like a hole in the head, but that I also agree with the consensus that the meetings are helpful and worth having. So I think it behooves us to continue them.
Okay, super. I think, based upon everybody's feedback, Kevin, I think that if you could schedule another meeting, probably that would be the second or third week of August, and that would be about 2 weeks after our regular PCP meeting or CPC meeting, to just meet again. People before then can provide comments to you and to the consultants if they have any issues or concerns, and we'll address those, look at those at that meeting. How does that sound?
Do you have any concerns?
I'm sorry, Ken, what?
I said I think that's fine. I just want to double check with Roseanne and Kate. Any concerns about that?
I don't think so. So that'll put us at Monday, August 8th, or potentially Monday, August 15th. I don't know if we can decide on a date right now. Is everyone okay with the 8th? If they can take a look at their schedule?
Yeah, I'm okay with the 8th. I'm looking at the calendar now, but that's sounds, let me check.
And we can do it via Zoom as
Yep.
well.
I'm open for either or both.
Okay, great.
Either, I guess, not both.
I don't know if you need us here, Kevin and Roseanne, but we potentially have conflicts on both those dates for both of us.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it would be great if you were here, but if you can't, between Roseanne and I and Doreen, who's not able to make it tonight, and possibly Johanna Brennan, I think we could cover it.
And for me, either of those dates would be fine.
Great. So let's put the 8th down, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make a calendar invite with Zoom details and send it out to everyone for the 8th.
Great.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I know there's a lot of work, and it's not the lightest reading as homework. And if anyone happens to be tuning into this video from the community and is not familiar with the City Planning Commission, I just want to emphasize these are all volunteers that are doing this work, and they do great work, and it's time out of their own schedule. So having an additional meeting, we appreciate that you're willing to do that so that we all do our due diligence together. And get this right. So we're all for it.
And I would say, just to keep things somewhat streamlined, if anyone wants to submit comments or questions ahead of time, I would send those to me. I'll be the collator of all of that, so that we have a chance to look at them ahead of time. Not that you have to, but if you want to, for instance, especially if, say, you turn out not to be able to make it, just let's send those in, and we'll do our best to get those prepared beforehand.
Cool. Last thing, Kevin, I'm on the documents and presentations page for the ZAP website, and I don't see it up yet. Do you have an ETA on when the presentation might be up?
So it's all the way at the bottom. The subheading is public input sessions. Do you see that?
Yeah.
ZAP community meetings from June 2022. Then it says presentation and video.
Got it.
Presentation is the slide deck. And then
Okay, cool.
And if you wanted to watch the video, that's the YouTube recording.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Sure thing.
Well, I'll just reiterate what Kevin said. We thank you very much for taking the time to do this. This is going to be an important document for the city, and it needs your oversight. And we realize it is a time sink for you, but we are very grateful.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you guys too. It's a lot of work for you, for the staff too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to the consultants. Well done.
It's our pleasure. This is fun stuff, right? Anything else from the commission?
Nope.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Enjoy your evening.
Yep, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take care.
Take care.